Cool. Yeah, I think we are on record now. So, Arvind, look, thanks for joining. Appreciate we've spoken offline before, and just recap for the audience a bit. So, we've started this podcast essentially as a platform to connect with founders and leaders within the medical device space like yourself to essentially discuss their journey and product in a bit more depth. So, look, it might be useful to first get a little bit of background on yourself, if you don't mind.
Sure. So I'm a veterinary doctor. I worked with wildlife for about 8 years in various jungles and deserts and forests around the world, and kind of got to see the front lines of public health from a very intimate perspective, particularly primary care, and particularly in really remote areas where people don't have access to healthcare. Um, and very often, particularly in really remote areas, veterinarian is the only health professional for everyone, including humans, and probably is for hours in any direction. So I got to see that firsthand, and I also got to see, sort of the issues that people face when there aren't healthcare facilities. Um, and while I got into clinical practice as a veterinarian, I soon realized that there were huge gaps in the kind of technology that was available, particularly for primary care. And I think, and for frontline screening, point of care, and there's now today, which is really different from when we started our journey 8 years ago. There's just so many variants of where you can access primary care. But what I realized was those tools are still going to be ubiquitous across those different modalities. So I started building my first tool in my clinic about 8 years ago, which was a digital stethoscope in 2016. I also built a PCR machine, and if I had known there was going to be a viral pandemic 4 years later, maybe I would have stuck to building PCR machines. But as luck and fate would have it, I decided that the stethoscope was a really interesting place to innovate, and that's kind of how I got into health tech and left practice.
Awesome, awesome. Yeah, so interesting. So, did you ever have? Was it more just by working within the space as within veterinary for about 8 years, and you spotted the gap? Is that kind of what led to you to do what you did, or did you always have a vision to go down an entrepreneurial route within the medtech space?
Um, no, I never had a vision. Probably even when I started the company, I didn't really see a long-term vision for how it would pan out. It was really to solve a problem that I had. And when I solved it, a lot of my colleagues started reaching out to me and started saying, can I get one too? And it just kind of like, it was like a wave, an avalanche. It just kind of just picks up momentum. And then people, the more you get into it, the more you realize what people want and what people need. And you're, it's almost like I feel like I was an accidental entrepreneur. I was an entrepreneur in the sense that like I understood business. I ran my own clinic. We had 5 doctors there, so I knew the fundamentals of a basic business.
Mhm.
But the tech startup world was something I never planned on. But that being said, in hindsight, in retrospect, it's always easy to see that there were key moments throughout my life which were really pivotal to me always kind of being ready for this kind of a move.
Yeah.
I was always tech friendly. I was always tech forward. I went to a university that was probably even till today one of the most advanced in technology in the world, which was the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, the place where the internet was invented, where the MRI was invented. And so I got to see tech, which was decades ahead of its time. I mean, like in 2003, we were on our campus, we were using the kind of internet speeds that the public has today, but we had it in 2003. So it was it was amazing. It was a different world. So in that sense, I feel like I was always ready to really embrace technology and to maybe even be a part of building it. um, and the other part is, of course, I was an exception among people I knew who were studying veterinary medicine or animal sciences, or that
Right.
kind of a field. Most of the people I knew were in technology building, were studying, in the early 2000s, computer science was like the thing. Everyone was getting into it, and that started going off into different areas. Some people were getting into hardware, some people were getting into software, and then eventually cloud, and then the internet boom, of course, and bubble. Um, so I was always peripherally seeing that happen. I had many friends who started up in 2006, 2007, sold off their startups within a year or 2 years. So yeah, in hindsight, it feels like life kind of prepared me for it. But when I started it, that was not my intention. I just wanted to solve a problem.
Yeah, yeah. It's always interesting that, isn't it? That's why I guess I hear a lot of entrepreneurs say, because it's such a tough journey, and without a strong enough purpose, you're probably not going to go down the whole journey. So I guess when you've got that motive of solving a genuine problem and you genuinely want to solve it, that's going to give you the willpower to carry through it. I guess for the benefit of the audience, do you mind just on that point, just talking through Muse Diagnostics in terms of what it actually does in terms of solving the problem that you saw, just in a little bit more detail, if you don't mind?
Sure. So the first problem that we saw, and just to break it down to be really simple, as a veterinarian in a clinic, if I'm examining a dog or a cat with a stethoscope, and a traditional stethoscope hasn't changed in about 200 years, of course there are a few startups solving it, um, and I'm trying to hear their heart sounds or their lung sounds, and any animal outside makes a noise, which is inevitable. You're not going to get a dog catching the scent of another dog and not make a noise about it, or a cat. And as soon as they start making a noise, it drowns out anything I want to hear. So that was the aha moment. That was the inception point of me being okay. I just need to remove that noise. And at the time, we already had these noise canceling headphones and stuff that had already been around. And I was like, why isn't all that tech in healthcare? Why isn't it in medicine? And then when I met my co-founder, one of the first things he suggested, and it had kind of been playing on my mind, but he articulated it perfectly. He was like, if we take defective heart sounds and put it on iTunes, Shazam should identify it, because that's what musicians do. They put their music on iTunes, and then Shazam tells you which song it is. And it's the same principle. We found out it's not exactly the same principle, so Shazam's not able to do it, which is great because that's market for us. But that was another aha moment. Like, if Shazam in 2000, I think 2011, or maybe even before 2011, I think it was pre 2010, was able to identify any one of a million songs playing, and you could just hold up your iPhone in a crowded, cafe or bar, and it's able to pick out of the noise of everybody screaming and talking, the one song that's playing on the speakers in the back. Um, and we're in 2025 now, and maybe there's 3 companies in the world who are doing this in healthcare. And it's not like we have a million plus, or hundreds of millions of songs out there in body sounds. There's probably a few thousand at best case. So that's how we started building first hardware, because one thing we realized is the database didn't exist, so you're not going to be able to do analytics if the database isn't strong. And the hardware didn't exist, so you're not going to be able to collect body sounds easily, and then analyze them if you don't have really scalable, affordable, high quality hardware. And so that was our journey till we got into market. Today, I wouldn't say we've pivoted. We've seen what our product does in the market, particularly where we get deployed in primary health, in remote areas, or in places where healthcare access is not good. And one of the things we realized is there's a series of problems, for nurses, particularly, or primary healthcare physicians, which is they don't have tools. They just have patients coming in with a series of symptoms, and they're expected to do with a minimal set of tools a lot of work. And usually a lot of that is mental. A lot of that is has to do with the sensitivity of their hearing, of their sight, which are fallible. We're human beings. Even doctors are human beings, and it's not all doctors have amazingly brilliant hearing, to catch out the faintest of abnormal body sounds. Um, but what we realized is there's a huge overlap. So the stethoscope is so unique, and body sounds are so unique because we're not just the heart. And most people like to think of body sounds as just being the heart, like, because that's loud, it's significant. But it's the lungs, it's the breathing of air in and out, it's the bowels and your bowel sounds, it's it's pregnancy and the sound of a fetus. There's so many aspects of sounds, and I think research is kind of just scratching the surface and what's possible in terms of what you can identify out of body sounds and what it can indicate. And where we are right now is we have created and we're going to clinical studies for a clinical decision support system. So something that takes data from stethoscopes, and ECG and spirometer, as well as other vitals and symptoms, to really give a kind of triage for primary care. A patient comes in breathless to a primary care, doctor or nurse. It's any one of probably 20 really bad things, or one of another 20 okay things. Is it heart failure? Is it pneumonia? Is it I mean, I could go on. There's a lot of conditions under just breathlessness, but that's what they're presented with. And then they have to do the process of figuring it out, asking all the questions and just interrogating. That takes time and effort. And we thought there's already rules around this. There's already rules set up for a clinician to make certain things. Can we make it faster, more effective? So we're helping them triage and say, okay, this is an emergency. This patient needs to go straight to a hospital, emergency care. Another patient, this is okay. I can wait. I can treat with either antibiotics or NSAIDs or whatever. Or this is not a big deal. You can come back and see me after 3-4 days if you still have the symptoms. So that's kind of where we are right now.
Awesome, really interesting. So, do you mind just going in a little bit more depth of obviously how you spotted the problem and then you developing the solution? I guess that might have been a tough journey, right? Like having an idea and a concept and getting it all the way through to product. Like, do you mind talking through that journey a little bit more?
Yeah. So when we first started, we thought the problem was, as I mentioned, maybe there aren't enough body sounds, which there still aren't, to be fair. We thought the problem would be that telehealth, which was then kind of picking up, not as much as it did during COVID. Of course, that was huge boost for the field, but we thought that would be an amazing use case where a physician could remotely listen to a patient and do a physical examination, no matter where they are in the world. They could sit in a city and do it in a patient anywhere, in remote parts of the world. Um, and over time, we realized, sure, that's a problem, but it's just the tip of the iceberg. Um, the real thing is that data is fractured, and it exists in silos. So, for example, there's amazing ECG companies who are doing amazing ECG AI, but that's a silo of data. There's amazing spirometer companies doing amazing spirometer AI, but that's also a data silo. There's pulse oximeter companies doing pulse oximeter AI, and that's another silo. And so what's happening is you're actually getting burnout because physicians, frontline health workers are basically being presented with a lot of raw data, which is more than what they used to deal with earlier. And then now they have to make complex decisions based on a lot more raw data. So that's what we saw in the field. And then we said, okay, look, we as a digital stethoscope body sound analytics company kind of sit in between all of these fields. We are the commonality across all of this. We're what the sticky glue that ties all of this together. So I think at a certain point when we realize that, and part of this reasoning comes from the fact that if anyone in listening to the podcast who is born prior to like 1980, which is before I was born, like would probably remember going to a doctor when the only tools the doctor would have would be a stethoscope, a traditional stethoscope, a blood pressure machine, a thermometer. Like that was it. That's all you would have when you go into the doctor's office. And what we're kind of doing is kind of bringing back that understanding, but in a really high tech way. And bringing together, what used to take doctors decades to kind of figure out and bring together in their head, but just kind of making it really simple to where a nurse or a frontline community health worker can do it. So that was kind of that journey of one, seeing the problem and the solution, but then also thinking, hey, this is kind of how it always has been. Like, why don't we just bring that back and make that idea just come, into the 21st century?
Yeah. Did you have to then find a way of consolidating data from lots of different sources effectively? That must have been quite challenging in itself, no?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I honestly, I can tell you, it doesn't really exist.
Sure.
We are probably one of the only people collecting that kind of multimodal data right now. Multimodal data is, of course, I mean, you may have heard, this is for people who are in healthcare, they know this is the hot thing. This is what makes sense now if you have different sources of data. But what everyone's talking about is multimodal in the sense of tertiary healthcare. So they're talking about mostly radiology, and then adding, your blood reports and your biochemistry kind of inputs into a intelligence system intelligence. What we're thinking is much more raw and much more basic, which is the front line. Like the first time someone's like, I feel off, I'm just going to see a doctor and make sure everything's fine.
Yeah.
And then having that input recorded doesn't exist. Like there's versions of it, like bits and snippets of it, that are out there, and there's bits of snippets of research out there, but they're really small and siloed. So we're probably, I would say, one of the first in the world that I know, and we're on track to do about 100,000 people worth of multimodal data in the next, 6 months or so. So we'll that'll be a substantial leap, and yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I guess I don't know how comfortable you are talking in a bit more depth about that, whether that's part of your USP, but I don't know if you have any advice for people trying to consolidate. I don't know if that's part of your USP, but you're trying to incorporate AI and things like, so that would be interesting to know, like what you think you're potentially doing that others aren't, or how comfortable.
Um, we see, one of the hard things is you have to bake data collection into a business model.
Yeah.
And that business model has to have a real value proposition for the customer. Um, and luckily, we were kind of already sitting at that intersection and seeing um, this idea that, if you brought all this data in from different tools, there was already kind of business models out there for public health screening, health camps by hospitals. And a lot of it was, I mean, when the government does it, or when governments do it, it's kind of, they're doing public health, they're doing primary health, and they're kind of analyzing health of the public at large. When private companies do it, it's a lead generation exercise. But either way, these exist. And so what we realize is we're already tapping into this as a monetizable model. um, can we tweak it so that we give better incentives to the client, saying, hey, I'll give you a better price, or I'll give you a different operating model where your costs are lower, whatever that is. Or I'll, for example, I'll bring in for the government, for example, I'll bring in a private partner to fund it out of CSR funds, corporate social responsibility funds. And governments are really happy about that, right? Obviously they don't want to be paying for everything. And then use those kind of models to think about, so now revenue is being generated for us, for the companies involved. Data is also being generated, and then it's up to you as to how you want to leverage the AI. You don't have to immediately deploy it, and I think that's the mistake a lot of companies do, is they
Okay.
think AI first. And I think in healthcare that's a mistake, because in healthcare, first, data, contextual data, gold standard data, that's the most important order of things. And when you have that, and that's strong enough, then you can think about, okay, deploy the AI retrospectively, build it, and then look at all this data you collected for the last, I don't know, 12 months. For us, it's about 2 years of data. Let's say in sounds, we have 500,000 body sound data points. So we look back at that and then started saying, okay, what are the contexts around this? Let's say, for example, 50,000 of the patients' lung sounds that we had recorded were, they're de-identified, but we know they were collected in a area that's very mining dense. There's a lot of mining happening, so air quality index is really poor there. So then, therefore, we understand there's a context around why their lung sound bad and what those could be.
Mm.
Um, so I would always say, argue that revenue first, second, contextualize your data, and the last thing is AI. Because once you've understood that, then the AI's value proposition then makes sense. I mean, there's no question about what kind of value it gives.
Interesting. How long did your journey roughly take from idea to getting to product? Do you remember like how long that journey was?
Oh yeah. So it took us 4 years from idea to product,
Yeah.
in market, our digital stethoscope hardware product,
Okay.
and that is still not product market fit. That was just us saying we have a finished, super stable hardware product. We're going to throw it out there, see how clients use it, see what the kind of feedback is, and what can we improve, what can we do better, where's the real use case. And we thought that was going to be our product, to be honest.
Okay.
um, and over time we realized that's good value, but it's not a strong enough value proposition, because the world is shifting so strongly towards leveraging different data sources, that you have to do something just to make people's lives easier, not to make it more complex.
Wow.
So I would say that took us another 3 to 4 years on top of that. One of the hardest things in healthcare particularly is, if you're a startup, no matter how good your idea is, no matter whether you have FDA approval, no matter whether you have really good funding, no matter what it is, no healthcare industry, whether they're government or private, is going to buy your product for the first few years. It's just given. And the reason is, they don't trust you're going to survive another 5 years. They don't trust you're going to survive another 1 year. Forget 5 years. Because you're a startup. Your life is inevitably, cruel and short, depending on the situation around the industry and the market. And so they don't trust it. If they would much rather buy something from a GE or a Siemens or a Philips, because they've been around for 100 years. There's
Mm.
no question that GE is not going to go bankrupt tomorrow, or Philips or Siemens or whoever. um and I think that's the real challenge in time frame, is you got to be a cockroach. That people talk about unicorns, but like in healthcare, it's cockroach. Like, nothing's got to kill you as long as possible. And at a certain point, when people see that, hey, no matter what I do, there's still cockroaches coming out of the woodwork. Like, okay, they're here to stay. They're here. They're going to contribute whatever they're contributing, no matter what. So that becomes like a really powerful incentive then for them to be like, okay, you've survived, I don't know, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, whatever that is, for how, depending on how complex your product is. I trust you now. I'm going to start placing orders.
Interesting. What would in that 4 year journey that you just mentioned about getting to a product that wasn't even quite market ready? What do you think, if you reverse engineer back? Obviously, hindsight's beautiful, but just for anyone listening, do you think you could have gone about things any differently in that journey to either save time, save money, and just for advice for other people, maybe at that stage of trying to develop products, of how they could potentially be more efficient, or not even? I
Yeah.
don't know if you've got any insights on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think I have a few insights on that. Because obviously we've looked back on it and we're like, man, we spent a long time. We could have probably shortened it by maybe about 2 years.
Really?
And obviously, part of that is there are iterations hardware products goes through, and hardware products, unlike software products, take a longer time to cycle around from when you realize this is not working. How do I re-engineer it? That itself takes 6 months at best case, to get around. I mean, if you have a lot of money, it could take you 2 or 3 months. That's if you have a lot of money. If you're a broke startup, kind of just, we were scrappy, right? We lived on grants and angel funding for like 4 years. We didn't get our first VC funding, for the first 4 years. It was just grants mostly, competitions and prizes and hackathons and stuff like that. And I think the most important, the hardest thing for me was, you're always looking as a scrappy startup on ways to save money and
Yeah.
not ways to save time. And
Yeah.
that's not always the optimal balance to cut. Very often, I will say there are caveats to this. There are people who charge way too much, whose money is not worth their time. But you're, I think, and what I'm specifically referring to you to here is hiring around product development. And hiring people around product development requires a really beautiful middle niche of people who are not too young, which means they're really cheap and affordable, like, fresh out of university. And those are great. And most of us do that mistake. We all hire startups as hard startups. We all hire straight out of college because we're like, oh yeah, I can afford maybe 3 embedded engineers for the price of one who has 10 or 12 years of experience. That will probably make my journey faster. It doesn't. They make more mistakes, they take more time, and that costs you more time in the long run, makes you look worse.
Wow.
um, and then there's the other startups who make a mistake of paying too much for really experienced people who aren't used to the 0 to 1 journey. And that's another problem. That's, you're going the other extreme there, where you're getting someone, let's say, who came out of GE or Siemens or Philips with 20 years of experience, and you're like, wow, that's amazing. These guys must be so, these people must be so knowledgeable and so clear cut on their ideas on healthcare. They're honestly not. And we know that, I mean, our co-founder's from GE, so he'd be upset about this. But he understands. Like, the 0 to 1 journey is totally different from what a corporate does. A corporate would spend, if GE did what we did, they would have spent hundreds of millions of dollars to get where we are today. And we've spent probably 500,000, just a bit more than 500,000 to get where we are. So that's a huge mistake another group of startups make, is that they have a great idea. A VC dumps a bunch of cash on them, or an angel dumps a bunch of cash on them, and they're like, "Great, let's hire the most senior, experienced people." And this is true not just of product development. I want to emphasize this is also true of sales. You got to find people who are still kind of young and hungry enough, but are not so green that they don't understand how the industry works. So there's like a really nice midpoint where you feel like you're paying a little bit more than you should, but you're not paying as much as you could be, you know, and you're going to get the maximum kind of value out of what you need from the 0 to 1 journey. So I would say that that's like my one like major thing. If I would go back and change, I would have done that.
No, really appreciate that insight and real honesty. Have you got any advice as well for people when it comes to the funding side of things? Because let's be honest, like I know people, you can be economical to a degree with finance, but things do cost money. At what stage they should look to do that, and also how they can go about, I guess, getting funding and giving themselves the best possible chance. Is there like a sweet spot from your perspective of get your company to this point before you go and ask for it, and any advice you've got into how to ask for it as well?
Yeah. So I can say the funding journey is horrible. It's just one of the most demoralizing journeys a founder can go on. And usually, what happens is you have people who have never started a business try and tell you how you should be starting a business. That's usually what happens. There are exceptions. There's great VCs who really understand and back founders early, who are patient. Um, the earliest, so everything has changed with AI. I can say that much. Like everything has changed. In 2016, when I started, if I had the benefit of an LLM, I would be doing, I would have done a lot more without raising money. And that's the advantage founders today have is that you can do a lot more without money to build a proof of concept, to bring in, a tech co-founder who sees a working proof of concept and the initial evidence it brings, to convince them that look, this is going to bring revenue. Get them to help you to scale to a certain stage where you are bringing in some revenue, some basic revenue just to keep afloat. Let's say minimal team, 1 or 2 people, maybe 3 or 4 people at max, um, and solving a really niche problem that is also very regulatory light in healthcare. Um, so a lot of people are already doing this, particularly on the billing cycles and revenue side of things. Um, the complexity of healthcare is that it's not really set up for disruptive innovation because of regulation. And that's where grants come in. And I think what's beautiful is most countries or most country groups in the world have really strong grant programs for young startups, for funding for research to be converted and commercialized. And I think that's the most powerful, no matter where you are, whether you're in the UK, the NHS has amazing grants, keep coming up. Um, the EU has amazing grants. The US, NIH, until recently, had great grants coming up. Um, Most governments in the world want to support startups, and there's a lot of programs available and funding available for that, but you need to be using it for the right reasons and for the right things. You need to be using it for your validation and your regulatory. And that's a mistake again I made back then that I probably wouldn't make again, which is that I use it for product development, which is you should not be doing. You should be doing the product development as much as you can without the big funding, the chunks. Grant funding are usually good chunks of money, and grant funding should go towards validation and regulatory. So that's on where how you should take the funding. Try not to take VC funding as much as possible for as long as possible. That's another really important thing I would tell startups. I know it's really hard because I we struggled for it for a long time with it for a long time, but I would say that should definitely be a goal, especially if you're in healthcare, because you're not going to be able to build evidence for a long time. And what happens is when you take it earlier, you dilute earlier, and then you just need more capital afterwards, and then you keep diluting when you get to a point and you're Series A and you only have 15% of your company. That's not a good position you want to be in, and no one's going to fund you after that. So you're kind of like you're stuck. Um, how you approach funding and funders, that's a I mean, to be honest, it's a question we're also trying to figure out.
Yeah, no
uh, but I would recommend funders are really motivated by, um, to be honest, look, they're human beings. They are motivated by really good missions. They are motivated by really passionate founders who really understand and care about what they're trying to solve. They're not as motivated by people who are just out to make a buck. Particularly when you look at the healthcare industry, healthcare funders are intrinsically understand
Yeah, yeah,
altruistic motivation.
yeah.
That being said, they're trying to make money off you. So you can't also go into that being like, I'm trying to save the world and I need your help to do it. And I don't know when I'm going to be able to pay you back. They don't want to hear that. They want to hear how much money they'll make off you, when they'll make that money off you. And the reason is not that they want to make that money off you, is that they have to make that money off you to give to the person who gave them the money. Right. So it's
Yeah.
kind of a vicious cycle. And most founders go into a VC meeting thinking that they're talking to a rich person who can give them money as they please. And that's not really how it works. There's a huge set of checks and balances within the VC ecosystem on how money gets deployed. And most healthcare founders I know make that mistake, which is that they expect that impact as a metric is powerful enough on its own, but it's not. A working business model that's recurring, that's exponential, that's scaling, is the most powerful metric a VC wants to see, and any investor really wants to see.
That's really good insight. Just I want to pick one point you said there, that you found that you spent funds in product development and maybe not enough on regulatory. I guess we speak to founders a lot, and they kind of say that, look, we're not at the point of regulatory yet, and we kind of have seen situations where they've developed something which and spent so much money developing something which isn't in line with the regulation. They have to go around. Have you found that to be, you think, quite a common thing that people do? And yeah, like what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's true. Like it's kind of the trap of being a healthcare entrepreneur, is that you're so focused on the problem and how your solution is going to be so amazing that you forget that there's entire systems already built around creating these kind of things.
Yeah,
And that the and to be honest, I would very honestly say 90% of healthcare startups are guilty of over engineering. They're
mm,
trying too hard to get to a too perfect product rather than saying, I need to get something that fixes someone's problem as soon as possible. Jump into regulatory, get the revenue out, and then try and work on your version 2.0, which can then be a big step up from 1.0. And then you can throw that back in the market. So now, if you're not jumping into generating a revenue cycle, um, it's ultimately you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot, and you can't jump into it obviously without having regulatory already done. And then if you spend all your money and all your time on product development, you're not going to get your regulatory done. So it's kind of one of those, like, if you look back, there's just like a domino effect of just putting everything top heavy and front heavy, rather than really spacing out your budget and your time.
yeah, absolutely. If we go into your journey a little bit more, then just let's say, like, said 0 to about 4 years, getting to a point of a product that wasn't even quite market ready. Do you mind just taking into a little bit more depth from there, when you kind of refine things, and then kind of where you're at right now? Do you mind just giving a little bit of a snapshot of exactly where you are right now and that journey from there?
Sure. So to be honest, year one, my co-founder and I were still juggling our main jobs, and so it wasn't. And this is, to be honest, unless you're born really rich, this is going to be the case. Yeah, your startup is going to be your side hustle until you really believe, you come to believe it enough that it's going to be your main hustle. So I was running my clinic. He was and still is a musician with a pretty successful career. Um, and I think we spent the first year and a half kind of figuring out what's the product. As I mentioned, we didn't just build a digital stethoscope. We built a PCR machine. We were trying to figure out what are the markets out there, because we know there's so many problems. There's just too many problems to solve. And we knew we had the skill sets for multiple of them, because my co-founder, for example, besides being a very successful musician, was also a very successful scientist and a geneticist, protein biologist to be specific.
Multi-talented.
And yeah, and I mean, yeah, absolutely multi-talented. And he likes to point out that there are a lot of musicians who are like that, who people don't know. I think he mentioned Donald Byrd, the jazz saxophonist, was a geneticist. So people do so. we spent the first year and a half kind of just playing around and ideating a lot and trying to figure out where it really fits. And our first couple of iterations were, I would not say a failure, but they didn't work the way we wanted them to work. We were trying too hard to optimize for cost, which is something that particularly, I mean, it's a thing when you develop, particularly out of India, you tend to believe, or Africa for that matter, you tend to believe that low cost is kind of the only way to go, which is we found out later on is not really the way we should be going. Um, and then the turning point for us was in 2017. We got our first pretty large scale government grant from the Indian government, and that really helped us reform our idea of what the product should be like, and really re-emphasize on the quality of the product that we wanted to produce. Um, Part of the next journey was getting to a really good working prototype. But then the hardest part of the journey for us was DFM, design for manufacturing, because that's a really complex task that most people, no matter what your background is in engineering, if you haven't done industry work in converting a prototype into a product, you're not going to understand header tails of DFM. It's going to take maybe a year to learn, which is what we did. We took a year to learn it. We were lucky because we won a competition. We were the winners of the American Society of Mechanical Engineers competition in 2019, and that was great because mechanical engineering is basically DFM, and we got amazing input from judges that was just all about what's your bill of materials, what's your BOM, how are you optimizing it, do you know that this, don't use this part, it's too expensive and it's not giving you the benefits you think it's going to give you. It's not going to come down when you buy more volume. The price is not going to come down when you buy more volume. So that kind of input was amazing, and it's really important when you're at that stage when you have a prototype, and I think moving into product, that you have that kind of expert input who really understands that transition from a cool project, which is what a prototype really is, to a product that's market ready and can be stable if you just throw it into the wild. um, and so that was a big transition. When we finished that, we were unlucky. We had just finished our first validation study and COVID hit a month later. So supply chains shut down worldwide, hospitals shut down to experiments. We're still an experiment, even though we just finished our validation study. So they're like, oh no, we don't need digital stethoscopes. We're focused on solving COVID right now, which is fair. Um, and so we were unlucky in that sense, but it really got us to double down on thinking about fundraising, because now we knew we had a product that was ready for manufacturing. And we spent the next year vetting and being vetted by a series of venture capitalists that then led to us getting invested by a deep tech Japanese investor, Beyond Next Ventures, who are a phenomenal deep tech investor, one of the most famous deep tech investors in Japan. Um, and and when we got their funds is really when we could really accelerate building a team that could bring a product to market. And then I would say that's another chasm, and I don't know, most startup founders would know this concept of chasms. There's two major startup chasms. One is when you build your product and you build your prototype and you're not quite able to convert it into something that's ready for market. So that's the first chasm. The second chasm is when you're trying too hard to push your product into market, and then the product market fit's going to take a while. You have to just be, you have to just survive that chasm. So I would say we got through the second chasm, both chasms really, but by the skin of our teeth. It was just being really ruthlessly stubborn that got us through that. And we definitely made the mistake of overhiring. We definitely made the mistake that I mentioned. We've made both sides of the mistakes I mentioned earlier.
Yeah,
We've
yeah, yeah.
made the earlier mistake of hiring too young and too inexperienced, and then we eventually got the right mix, and then we did the same mistake but on the other side for sales, where we hired too experienced but with no idea of how to take a company from 0 to 1. So then we burnt our fingers there and spent too much money there. And then finally, when we stabilized, it was when we fixed all these problems, built a beautiful, really lean team that everyone understood their roles perfectly and could kind of figure them out. And that's kind of when the resilience we built over the years in market kind of started paying off. And then people started noticing, hey, these guys are just continuously coming back at us and they're still deploying, they're still putting products out of the market, people are still buying it. Maybe there's something to their product. And word of mouth starts to get around. Word of mouth is one of the most powerful things in healthcare. People don't understand, like, it's way more powerful than any kind of paid advertising you can do. Word of mouth is basically, I would say, how most good healthcare companies probably get built. And I mean, particularly in the medical space, not in
Well,
consumer.
why is that, Dr. Arvind? Why is word of mouth super important, particularly in the healthcare space?
Because people don't read product reviews, and they don't necessarily always trust publications, because publications could be biased. They Professionals, under medical professionals and decision makers in healthcare businesses, understand there are ways to game the system.
Okay.
And there are ways to game the system by throwing publications out there. There's ways to game the system um, by paying people for great reviews, etc. But there's one way you can't game the system is that if someone, the medical professional or the institution leader, trusts, who tells them, hey, this startup has a really good product, we've been using it, you should try it out. There's nothing like that. That The power of that is exponential, because what it does is it removes a lot of the doubts that you then spend time in the sales process trying to remove from the client's mind. It removes them from the get-go, because you came through a trusted source that wasn't trying to make a commission and market you. You came from someone who had nothing to gain except to be like, hey, we really gained by using this, you should try it out. So I think that's why organic marketing is really, like, word of mouth is the most powerful thing there.
I just wanted to pick another point that you said. You said that most products are over-engineered. I think you said probably you think about 90 odd
Yeah.
percent. Have you got any advice for people to, I guess you could develop a great product, but it might not be fit for the market. And I guess that must have been a key thing for you guys, looking at what does the market actually want. Have you got any advice? Firstly, do you think that that is a problem where people aren't looking enough at product market fit? And have you got any advice for how people can kind of go about that to ensure that what they are doing is going in the right direction and they're not going to find out, oh no, we've just developed the
I
wrong
think I think people confuse very often feature market fit for product market fit.
thing? Okay.
Um, like, if you ask a doctor, hey, I got this awesome device. Would you like it if I threw in, the latest Bluetooth model and I mean, for a stethoscope, let's say the latest Bluetooth, a fancy set of headphones. No one's gonna say no to all the fancy features. But if you come back and say, will you pay for that? Or does it make an incremental difference to the product I'm trying to sell you? Very frequently, they're not going to reply to you, but because they're not buying your product, the answer is no.
Mm,
Um, and I think one of the things about market fit is that as entrepreneurs, we're biased towards the features we're developing,
yeah.
um, and the features aren't the product. And killing features is one of the hardest things for a founder to do, because you feel the product's your baby and the features are part of the product so intensely. But they're not. The product is a specific thing that's solving a specific problem of the market. And that's a core thing beyond which you're adding a bunch of stuff that makes it bells and whistles and makes it look cool. So that's what I mean by over engineering. It's not always like you're making it that much better, but part of it is also you're throwing a lot of bells and whistles that aren't maybe necessarily core to the problem.
Mm,
And you do it because you think it'll look cool. And to be honest, a lot of this comes from the fact that we have an amazing consumer industry that loves to sell us on bells and whistles. Like, the iPhone does it, like the Aura Ring, and like all of these companies who do consumer stuff really sell you on bells and whistles. But in MedTech, bells and whistles don't move the needle in someone adopting you. And I think that's kind of where a lot of people don't understand that, and we tend to be biased in our knowledge of consumer marketplaces and apply that same kind of logic to MedTech marketplaces, and they're just two different ball games entirely.
really interesting. Really interesting. Do you mind just taking a little bit on your journey? So let's say when you feel you've got product right, and then you kind of alluded to it earlier, actually, where you said that actually getting people to buy the product is so hard, especially if you're a startup, because they don't have a lot of confidence about your longevity. Do you mind just taking through your journey about how you went about trying to, I guess, commercialize things and any insights you could share on that?
Sure. It's a brutal journey. One of the things I would say we should have been more aware about, and I would advise to all startup founders, when you first get funded, you need to be viciously guarded and protective about your monthly burn, like viciously. And I would say one of the frequent mistakes we all make, and I've seen this in like other co-founders or other founders of other companies in health tech, particularly, that we tend to be more optimistic, and this is the double curse of being an entrepreneur. You cannot be a good entrepreneur without being an unreasonable optimist. That is the gift of being an entrepreneur, is that you just have to be stupidly optimistic. And my co-founder very frequently, I am the stupid optimist in the company, and he's the skeptical realist who's like, "Nah, bro, that's not going to happen."
Yeah. Do
Like,
you listen to the podcast Diary of a CEO by any chance? I don't know if you've heard Diary of a CEO podcast with Stephen Bartlett. I don't know if
Sorry.
have you heard of the podcast Diary of a CEO with Stephen Bartlett at all?
Yeah. I have. Yes, yes.
Yeah. So he kind of said that in his opinion, to be an entrepreneur, you need to be deluded to a degree. So it's kind of alluding to what
Oh,
you're
yeah.
saying.
Yeah, but and the problem with that delusion is it comes with it comes with a huge baggage, which is that the delusion doesn't take into account that all of your assumptions and all of the things that are going to happen in the market and in the environment are going to be wrong or different, right?
Mm,
And that comes back to my earlier analogy of the cockroach mentality. Like, and that comes back to like this thing of, if you were a cockroach, right, and you had no idea how the world, you don't know there's a nuclear bomb coming, right? But you're built for resilience. You're built to figure out that no matter how much pesticide is sprayed, no matter how much whatever's happening, you're gonna hunker down and wait until the situation is right. We had a great mentor who's been in the industry for like 25 years, who said the golden rule of healthcare startups is serendipity. He said that's the one thing you need to depend on. He says you need, like, healthcare startups need to just hunker down and wait for your moment. There's always a moment, and everyone thinks the moment they get funding is that moment, but that's not true, and especially not in healthcare. Um, your funding is just an opportunity to give you a longer lifespan to wait for that moment.
mm,
So um, I would say we made that mistake very classically in the first year. We learned very quickly, cut our burn, and gave ourselves the longevity to last another few years. And then when sales started coming in, we were like, oh wow, the the crisis has passed. Sales are now picking up, and we're funding everyone in our company. We're paying off debts, which is inevitable in a company, in a startup, where we're able to do all of these actions, and the growth is just picking up. It's not rocket ship to where VC is going to be like, oh my god, I'm going to do it, because health tech is never rocket ship. If it is, there's something fundamentally broken. Health tech is going to be slow and steady all the way up. um, and so that's that journey, is realizing that you always need to build your systems, your staff, your team, for survival, and not for and when I say survival, I don't mean just to be like conservative. That's the wrong approach. You should not be conservative. When I say survival, I mean you are waiting for your chance, that one opportunity. Like, I know I hate to. The reason I keep using a cockroach metaphor is my
yeah.
kitchen has an infestation, which we've been trying to like debug for like, and spray them out of every corner. And you know what? Like, you give them a week, you don't see them around, and suddenly, one morning you just switch on the light, and there's like one little guy creeping out of somewhere. You know why? Because they saw, oh, like, hey, they've not been doing anything for a while. Here's my chance. I'm going to come out and thrive. And that's basically, I felt like, I feel so much sympathy and synergy with what he's doing, that I'm like, yeah, that's what health tech is. Like, you gotta wait, and at a certain point, health businesses are like, wait, I need this. What are you doing? Come over here. I need to buy this. And that's your opportunity. You gotta take that. You gotta jump at that opportunity when it presents itself. So serendipity is a key part of survival. So it's not just be conservative. It's about bide your time and wait to strike when the iron's hot.
Yeah, for yourself, do you mind explaining that what happened in your context then? So is that what happened for you? You found like the right time where you really went to things. How did you identify that moment, and what did you specifically do?
I don't know if it was, to be honest, I don't think it was anything we specifically did. It was more like, okay, so obviously there was a point where we did do something, but a lot of it was we kept telling people about what we're doing. We kept putting our product out there. We kept demoing it. We were ruthless about letting people know we are here. And that's something you just need to do. Like
Was that through
that's
marketing, Arvind? Just want to get like, what did you specifically? Is that through like just speaking to lots of people in the space? Did you like do lots of marketing through other channels? Like, what's the best kind of way to kind of, I guess, get your product a little bit out there? Because you've already alluded to it's
uh,
so hard to get people to back it anyway.
yeah. So one I think one amazing thing about health tech is it's visceral. And particularly if you're not in the software side. If you're in the software side, okay, I understand. There's many ways to market it. But most of healthcare is tactile. They're physical objects. Yes, there's digital aspects of it, but for me, there's nothing that beats a physical demo. You can cold call and cold email all you want, but in health tech, just putting yourself out there. So we used to just keep going to events, healthcare events, hospital events, innovation events, and there's just particularly post COVID, there's so much of it happening that you just kind of have to immerse yourself in it, and it's draining, but you have to be again relentless about
Yeah.
putting your name out there, giving your card out, talking to healthcare business CEOs and CPOs, purchase officers, anybody who does either purchasing or who is a decision maker in a healthcare business. You need to be relentless about talking to them, understanding what they are, and but also showing what you're doing. Like, don't be shy or don't be like reticent about, oh my, it's not done yet, I'm not sure. Like, no, man, be like, look, yo, it's a prototype, or it's in the works. We're trying to sort some bugs, but this is it. This is us. This is where we are right now. And what happens is, and what we found happens is, after about a year or so, people we had spoken to, we hadn't sold to them, but they were talking about us. And
Interesting.
then 2 years in, they started talking to somehow the word of mouth reached kind of the right ears, and then those ears didn't respond immediately. But what happened was an opportunity presented, which then required our product. And then they were like, oh, yeah, I remember that person talking about this at this point in time, like maybe a year ago. Let me reach out to this company and see if they're still around, still doing this. And it's so much validation when they realize that they've been around thinking about this for a year, and then the opportunity came, and then they reach out. They're like, oh yeah, you guys are still around. You sold a bunch of devices. That's great. You sold a bunch of product. That's great. um, and so what happened was, it's a very the initial stage is really, when you get your name out there, the cascading effect is really slow, and so it feels initially like nothing is moving.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But because we're just relentless and just putting cards, putting name, putting demos everywhere, and showing people, hey, we're doing this, listen to your heart, like, and that's something, part of the beauty, I guess, of our product is, um, most people haven't heard their own heartbeat, or heard their breathing,
Mm.
and it comes as a wonder to them. Sometimes it's a joke, like people say, like, oh, you really have a heart, or things like that. And I think, but I mean, this applies for a lot of health tech products, where you can show things and people are viscerally convinced, or viscerally get the effect of it. Um, and but that still takes time to build. And I think we reached a point maybe 2 years in, when suddenly our name had gotten around in the right circles enough, and then we started getting calls, and then our website suddenly started ringing off the hook, and we weren't promoting it or anything. Suddenly, like one day, like, I mean, we were on, our hosting platform, gives me pings every time someone comes to our website. And maybe about a year and a half ago, it just started building up and building up, and day by day there were more visitors to our site, not just from India but from around the world. And there's kind of there was just momentum building without us having done anything except kind of stay around and just putting the word out there. So yeah.
Really interesting. Really interesting. Yeah. So, like, do you mind just, I guess, as well, talking us through where you're at the moment? What are your key priorities from here? So, like, what do you mind just giving a bit of idea in terms of currently where you're selling at the moment, and what you're trying to do maybe in the next sort of short to medium term and long term as well?
Yeah, sure. Currently, we are primarily a seller of digital stethoscopes that are our products, and primarily in India. In a few months, we will be exporting it to the Middle East, to East Africa, to Sri Lanka, and a few other countries. And we're in regulatory processes for some of those. Um, and That's kind of the real immediate short term. We're also in a series of clinical studies, as I mentioned, for a clinical decision support system that we're building for primary care. That is a cardiorespiratory triage system. It's to screen at front lines cardiorespiratory issues, which are the bulk of deaths, the bulk of major problematic issues, uh, particularly acute, but some chronic as well. Um, and in the midterm, we are in a few programs where we are collecting over 100,000 patients. We're expecting in another 12 months, we'll be on track to do 1 million patients worth of multimodal data.
Wow.
And it will be the largest data set of its kind that we know about, at least. Um, there are countries where these data sets may exist but are not open. But particularly because sound has not been collected, body sounds have not been collected till now. Not much, not by except by other companies like us. We know that opportunity is there. Um, so in the midterm, we're going to looking to have about 1 million patients worth of multimodal data that then further backs the evidence behind our clinical triage and screening softwares. And then we're looking to deploy that in primary care pretty much worldwide. So we'll be looking at starting in India, in sub-Saharan Africa, as well as MENA region and Southeast Asia. We see primarily our demand is going to be initially from low middle income countries, but because we're also seeing there's a huge push now in centralized health systems like Canada and the UK, mixed systems like Europe, where some countries are largely government, some countries are mixed. And even in the US, where primary care is having a huge boost from the private market, there's a lot of private market primary care players. So, and Japan, I have to mention as well, the government has put a lot of emphasis now into bringing primary care back. And a lot of it is varying in its permutations and combinations. Some people are trying to do it by enabling rural pharmacies to do it, like the NPA in the UK, classic example. They've done a study with actually with our competitor, um, well, with one of our competitors and one of our collaborators on deploying murmur screening technology in a pharmacy. So a pharmacist is going to do it, an NPA pharmacist is going to do it. But if there's something wrong, they're going to send you to a cardiologist. You'll get an NHS appointment immediately. You get prioritized. So that kind of alleviates a lot of the NHS administrative burden because they're able to push things out into the fringes. So it's happening in all countries. We really see it happening in all countries. And how do you strengthen this? That's what we're really trying to do. So that's kind of the long-term goal for us is to we're looking to strengthen frontline triage of with giving, given all the primary healthcare kind of devices and inputs. When I say primary healthcare devices, I'm emphasizing that these are low cost devices where even if you collect all of them, they should cost you, maybe not more than $500. So I'm specifically, for example, in excluding point of care ultrasound or handheld ultrasound, which is at very minimum $2,000, $3,000, and it requires expertise use. I don't really see that becoming a frontline care tool. Um, but the others already are. They're commoditized. A pulse oximeter you can buy for throwaway prices pretty much everywhere. ECGs are heavily commoditized now. You can buy them off Amazon, and great ones by AliveCore. Omron has really revolutionized blood pressure machine access by making it super cheap. It's like what $40, $30, pretty much anywhere around the world. Same in pounds. So um, a lot of those have been commoditized. We kind of sit at the intersection of a lot of them. So we're trying to say, okay, let's bring all of this into one thing where you can really bring healthcare as close to the patient as possible. And in the case of some patients, suppose you have a chronic illness, we bring it to your house. Let it be in your house. You have elderly parents who have a chronic issue, or you have children who have a chronic issue, or who are vulnerable. This kind of suite of products is already mostly there. Post COVID, many of us already have a pulse oximeter at home. Many of us already have some basic kind of, we already had thermometers, let's say, to begin with, right? But this is kind of, we're slowly expanding that. What does everyone have access to make sure that when they think things are not right, they can have something to check it. And to be honest, tools like the smart rings and smart watches haven't really been able to give enough data or enough information to do more than something really simple. And we think that the healthcare industry's already done that. We're just going to bring it in and make it really powerful.
Awesome. I really appreciate everything you've shared, and it's been really, really insightful. You've been very candid and open with everything you've shared as well. I should have actually just asked this question just when you were going into the commercial, but I just want to ask probably the last couple of questions. You kind of said that don't be afraid to kind of put your product out there, keep going to places and stuff. Will you still say that there's certain things people need to get right before they do that? Just as an example, I know that we talk to I guess MedTech companies, and they talk to us about distributors. Can you help us get a distributor? And I'm like, where are you with regulatory? Like, we've not started that yet. I can't help them with the distributor side of things until they've got that. So there's so it's kind of a chicken and egg situation. So I don't know if you have any bits of advice of try and get these things kind of ticked off before you start to push out there. I don't know if you've got any bits that you can share there.
Yeah, I mean, it is a chicken and egg situation. It's really hard, like, to reason your way around a chicken and egg situation. Um, I think part of it is what I mean when I say put your device out there is that you need name recognition and brand recognition of your technology and your name, your individual name as founder of the company, or you and your co-founders need that name recognition to already be present even before your regulatory and your distribution come through, because name recognition is not something that is built overnight. It compounds, right? So the more people see you out, the more they're like, oh yeah, this is there. And then you remind them again and again and again. And by the time you're done with your regulatory and you're ready for distribution, it makes the distributor's job a lot easier if they're going out there and saying, hey, I have these people's product, Muse Diagnostics, and the healthcare decision makers like, oh yeah, I know them. I met them, like a year ago. I met them 6 months ago at this event, and I met them multiple times. Like, oh, they're finally in market. Fantastic. Like I already have the context of what they are. And part of that is really important also because people assume distributors are there to sell your product for you. Um, that's partially true, but that's not really true. That's not the whole story. You really are the key to selling your own product. Your brand recognition is independent of that of the distributor. The distributor is just a conduit or a channel to get your product in front of someone's face and then to close the final loop on the sale. It's not selling the product itself. That comes from the compounding effect of you putting it out there. Sure, you do have to make sure that your product is mostly stable. Look, like I've put buggy products in front of people, decision makers, many times. And I've been very careful about it because there's certain ways to do it. I mean, I don't know if you know, it's a famous story about Steve Jobs and when he released the iPhone of they didn't have all the features ready on a single phone. So what they did was they made, I think, 6 or 8 phones, each one with one of the features working, and he would keep going backstage and bringing out the new devices. Like, hey, so look, we have iTunes on this, and then come out and like, hey, we have email on this, and so there's ways to do it where you have to be careful about what you present, and you're going to fix it. I mean, there is an aspect, I know people will think of that, this is a very startup mentality of fake it till you make it. But when you've built the individual pieces, actually, you're already almost the way there. You'll do it eventually. There's a time of inevitability about it. And when you feel that time is approached, that's when you should be confident about going and demoing your product.
Really, really appreciate that. Thanks so much. And I probably the last thing I'll leave you with, you've given lots of insights, but let's say a founder entering MedTech today, what would you say to them in a sort of nutshell? What would be the main things?
I mean, the first thing I'd say to them is like, you're really lucky you're starting health tech in the age of AI. I mean, that's awesome. There's so much you can do. I mean, okay, the first thing I would say is caveat, don't depend on AI. You have a critical brain. Your critical brain came to this point for a reason. Use your critical brain first. AI is a tool, it's not a crutch. You can bounce ideas off of it, but be skeptical and always question from a first principles basis. And that's one of the most important things most health tech founders don't do today and just generally don't do. Keep questioning from a first principles basis as to whether this is important, is this needed, is this relevant, am I solving this person's problem, who is the person whose problem I'm solving, how important is that pain point or that problem, how desperate are they to solve that problem? These are really important first principles questions. Um, the second thing I would say is be really careful about the money that comes into your company and the money you commit to going out of your company, whether that is hiring, whether that is product development, whether that's regulatory, whether that's distribution. Be really viciously, protective of it. And I say that, with a caveat, you're trying to protect your own interests, the company's interests, but also think about it from a really positive social impact sense. If you don't survive, the social impact of your product doesn't survive. The lives you could have impacted doesn't survive, doesn't happen, right? Your employees, you're also protecting their long-term livelihoods and their, future. So I would say those are the two major principles. And if you take care of these two principles and you're really rigorous about those two principles, and focus on the long term rather than the short term, you're bound to do well.
Awesome, awesome. Look, I've taken so much of your time. I'll let you go now. But honestly, it's been really a real pleasure speaking to you, and I think people listening to this will get a lot of value. So thank you so much for sharing.
Thanks, Junaid. Thank you. I really appreciate it.
No
Take
worries.
care.
Thanks. Bye.
Yeah. Cheers.